Hello friends, welcome to my video lecture. In this video lecture, we are going to learn Introduction to Analytical Chemistry. Before going to start, we have to see the basic term about this topic. Okay, so first of all, we have to see what is meant by analytical chemistry. Analytical chemistry is the branch of chemistry. Okay, so in which deals with the study of separation, identifications, and determination of the amount of the compound present in the sample. So all these things we can do into the analytical chemistry. We can separate of specific element from the sample. We can identify the specific element from the sample, and we can determine how much amount is present of specific element in that sample that we can determine. Okay, now we have to see the types of analysis. They are qualitative analysis, and second one is the quantitative analysis. And we have know that qualitative means that deals with the identification of substance. It concern with the what elements or what type of compounds are present in the sample. So if we study any kind of sample, and if you want to analyze that substance, so what kind of elements are present in that sample, that we can see into the qualitative analysis. And how much amount is present, okay, that determine into the quantitative analysis. So determination of amount we can see into the quantitative analysis. It is concerned with the determination of how much of the particular substance is present in the sample, that we can see into the quantitative analysis. The next is qualitative analysis, again divided into two types. First one is inorganic qualitative analysis, and the second one is organic qualitative analysis. So in the inorganic qualitative analysis, you can see the analysis ions of elements are separated and identified by the precipitation technique. Okay, so if we having the different unknown sample, and we can identify them and we can separate it from each other by the precipitation technique in the inorganic qualitative analysis. And in the organic qualitative analysis, the elements or compounds are identified by the chemicals. Okay, so that elements which are present in the sample, that we can identify by chemical technique. Now we have to see some analytical method. Okay, by using that analytical method, we can measure some physical properties that we have to see, and that all they are given into this table. You can see first one is the gravimetric method. So by gravimetric method, we can measure the specific element mass, right? By volumetric, we can measure the volume. This is the physical property that measure into this analytical method. Okay, now see the next. Conductometry is there, potentiometry, voltammetry, polarography. So into this analytical method, we can measure the electrical potential, electrical conductance. Right. Now the next analytical method, that is spectrophotometry, in which X-ray, UV visible, IR, atomic absorption, and NMR, etc. All these things analytical methods we can measure in by this method absorption of radiation. And the next analytical method, emission spectroscopy, flame photometry, fluorescence. In this technique, emission of radiation, we can measure emission of radiation. Some atoms are continuously emitting radiation. That uh, radiation we can measure with the help of this analytical technique. Turbidimetry, Raman spectroscopy. In this technique, we can measure the scattering of radiation. Some elements are scattering radiation, that we can measure with the help of turbidimetry. Okay, next is the refractometry. So in this case, we can determine the purity of the substances by measuring the refraction of radiations. And next is the polarimetry. In this technique we can measure the rotation of radiations, for example glucose. So we can measure the glucose molecule rotation of radiations. The next is the X-ray electron diffraction method. In this technique, we can measure the diffraction of radiations. Okay, and the next is mass spectroscopy. In this technique, mass to charge ratio we can measure. This is the physical property for the mass spectroscopy. And the last one is thermal conductivity. In this technique, we can measure the thermal analysis. Okay, thermal analysis we can see into the thermal conductivity. Now we have to see analytical perspective. What is our object, okay, into the analytical chemistry? So there are the probably as many description of the analytical approach. There is number of large information about the analytical objective, but we have to see in the 5 steps. Our purpose is to treat is as 5 steps processes. In the first step, you can see, suppose if you want to analyze the any kind of sample. So first of all, we have to identify and define the problems. Okay, in the first step, what is the problems contain? Okay, that we have to fix. And the next step, we have to design the experiment with the help of which kind of experiment procedure we can use for the identification and define the problems, right? So in this case, establish the design criteria and identify the potential interferent and establish the validation criteria. So all these things we have to see in the steps second. Select the analytical method and establish the sampling strategy. So we have to take this point into the steps 2. And the steps 3, conduct the experiment and the gather data, calibrate the instrument and equipment and standardization reagent and gather data. So this is the requirement for the experiment to perform. We should know the number of things for the experiment perform. It should be calibrated instrument and valid method, okay, standardized reagent, and lot of information we should know for the conduct the experiment. And we can see that in the third step. In the fourth step, reduce the transform data and the complete and statistical analyze, verify the result, interpret result. After performing the experiment, whatever the result will be there, that we have to transform into the data, and that we have to analyze. Okay, we have to verify the result, interpret the result. Okay, we have to match that result with the theoretical result. This is the practical result, right? And the for the next step, you can see here the steps 5. The purpose of solution to problem is the answer if sufficient, do's answer, suggest a new problems. Finally, result. After result, you can see whatever our target, so that answer is sufficient or not. Okay, after that we can see that yes, whatever the we have experiment performed, that is sufficient for us or not. Okay, so in this way experiment. Okay, if it is not solved, then again you have to go in this way by these steps. In the above steps, consider the following questions. In the first, what is the analytical problems? What should be the analytical problems? Next is, what type of information is needed to solve the problems? Right? What type of information is needed to solve the problems? If you want to analyze the any kind of sample, so which kind of information should be we should know, right? And the next is, how will the solution to this problem be used? Okay, so we have to think about it, which procedure we can use for the solve problems. So like this question we have to know that. The next is, what criteria were considered in design the experimental procedures? So to design the experimental procedure, we have to see which criteria we can use for the experimental procedure design. Okay, and the next is where there any potential interference that had to be eliminated. If so, how were they treated? The next question that will be the is there a plan for the validating the experimental method? So you should know that, yes or no. Okay, how were the sample collected? If you want to analyze the sample, okay, so before the analysis that sample should be good and well. Okay, that sample should be taken from the different places. Okay, so in this way we have to take this question. And is there any evidence that steps 2, 3, 4 of the analytical approach are repeated more than once? That we have to see. If that we have seen the steps 2, 3, 4, so already information is there, so we have to see that about that steps. The next is, was there a successful conclusion to the problems? After perform the experiment, we have to see that the successful conclusion to the problem or not. Okay, now next we have to see the common analytical problems. Generally number of problems are occurring into this analytical during the analysis. So in that, the first one, to measure the concentration of glucose in blood. Okay, during the measurement of concentration of glucose in blood, you can see there is a number of problem is creating during the measurement of that thing. Next, to determining the difference between the bulk and surface concentration of the chromium in the steam. So this is also common analytical problem. The next is to determine the concentration of targeted species in a complex sample. Okay, if you have given any complex sample and if you want to analyze the specific element which is present into that complex sample, so that will be the complicated for the these techniques. Next is in the clinical, pharmaceutical, environmental and industrial laboratories. So number of problems are occurring in this section or areas. And we'll see clinically, pharmaceutically, environmentally and industrial laboratories. The next is to determination of the chemical structure. We have know in the chemistry there will be the organic chemistry, there will be the inorganic chemistry. So in that subject number of structures are there. So determination of that chemical structure, it's very difficult to there. Okay, so by using some techniques we can determine that, but in analytical there is very difficult to determine the chemical structure. The last one is to find out the particle size and surface structure, that is characterization analysis to solve the problems of the sample. So there will be the two very difficult to find out the particle size, okay, in the surface structure, okay, during this characterization analysis.